I still hear the screams sometimes. They weren't his. They were hers, Princess Chinello's. It was market day, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted plantains, dried fish, and fresh herbs. Merchants shouted over the noise, bargaining with customers, while children darted between stalls, clutching sweets and small treasures. I was at the blacksmith store, examining a new blade Chidi had forged. It was flawless, like everything he made, but I could see the tiredness in his eyes as he handed it to me. Before I could ask what was wrong, the shouting started. The guards came in a rush, patting the crowd like a flood, their faces stern and their spears glinting in the sun. At first, we didn't know who they were after. Then we saw them grab Chidi. He didn't resist. That's the part that haunted me the most. He just stood there as they tied his hands, his face calm, almost resigned. Chinello wasn't calm. She burst through the crowd, her voice cutting through the market like a blade. "Chidi," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Leave him alone." The guards didn't listen. They dragged him through the square, toward the chief's palace. Chinello ran after them, fighting to reach him, but two of the older guards blocked her path. "You can't do this," she shouted. "Father, you can't do this." The crowd stood frozen. No one dared to move or speak. In our village, the chief's word was law. Chidi wasn't born into greatness. His family was ordinary, farmers who worked the land and raised goats. As a boy he was quiet but curious, often wandering into the bush to watch birds or following the blacksmith, old Uko, as he worked. "Chidi, fetch me water," Uko would bark, and Chidi would run to the river, fascinated by the sparks flying from the forge when he returned. By the time he was 12, Chidi had started shaping small trinkets in the evenings after Uko finished his work. At first, they were crude, uneven circles of metal or clumsy knives that bent under pressure. But Uko saw the boy's determination and began to teach him properly. "Chidi, the fire is your friend," Uko would say, holding a glowing piece of iron with his tongs. "But respect it. One mistake, and it will devour you." Chidi learned fast. By 16, he was making blades so fine that even the warriors began to take notice. "Who made this?" they'd ask, holding up a perfectly balanced spearhead. "The boy," Uko would reply, a hint of pride in his voice. Chidi's family, however, didn't share Uko's pride. His father wanted him to stay on the farm, to till the land and follow the old ways. "You can't eat a blade," his father grumbled one night, after Chidi returned late from the forge. "But the blades buy food," Chidi replied, his voice quiet but firm. The truth was, Chidi loved his work. It gave him purpose, a sense of control. He didn't dream of riches or fame. He just wanted to create something lasting. Then Chinello entered his life, and everything changed. Chinello was the chief's only daughter, and from the moment she was born, her life was planned for her. The elders spoke of alliances, of a marriage that would strengthen the village's ties to the neighboring clans. "She will marry a prince," her father often said. "And she will lead our people into a golden age." But Chinello had other ideas. As a child, she followed her older brothers into the training grounds, sneaking into the warriors' huts to watch them practice with their spears and shields. She learned to fight by mimicking their movements, and by the time she was 14, she was challenging them outright. "You're a girl," one of them scoffed. "And you're about to lose to one," she replied, disarming him with a quick twist of her wrist. Her father tolerated her antics, amused by her spirit, but as she grew older, his patience began to wear thin. "You are a princess, Chinello," he reminded her one evening after she returned from a hunt. "Not a warrior." "Why can't I be both?" she asked, her voice steady. Her defiance only grew when suitors began arriving at the palace. Chinello dismissed them all, princes, warriors, even a wealthy trader from the coast. "I marry when I find someone worth marrying," she told her father. Her boldness made her beloved by the people but exasperated the elders. "She's wild," they whispered. A storm waiting to happen. And then, one day she met Chidi. It was during the festival of the harvest, when the entire village gathered to celebrate the end of the rainy season. The square was alive with music and dancing, the smell of roasted yams and spiced goat filling the air. Chidi had been dragged to the festival by his younger sister, Esin. "You work too much," she complained. "Come and enjoy yourself for once." Reluctantly, he agreed. Chinelo spotted him near the edge of the square, standing awkwardly as the villagers danced around the fire. She didn't recognize him at first, just another face in the crowd. But something about his quiet demeanor intrigued her. "You there?" she called, stepping out of the circle. "Why aren't you dancing?" Chidi froze, unsure how to respond. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the music. Chinelo laughed, a rich, unrestrained sound. "Then I'll teach you." Before he could protest, she grabbed his hand and pulled him into the circle. The villagers watched, stunned. The princess, dancing with a blacksmith. It was unheard of. But Chinelo didn't care. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. Their relationship grew in secret, but secrets have a way of slipping out. One evening, a servant overheard Chinelo laughing in the forge and saw Chidi handing her a small pendant he had crafted. She reported it to the chief. Izokoro summoned Chidi to the palace the next day. "Do you know why you're here?" the chief asked, his voice cold. Chidi nodded. "Yes, my lord." "Then you know what you've done is an insult to this family, to this kingdom." "I meant no disrespect," Chidi replied. "But I love her." The room fell silent. Love. It was a word that carried little weight in the chief's world. Marriages were alliances, not matters of the heart. "You love her," the chief repeated, his tone mocking. "And do you think that is enough?" Chidi met his gaze. "It is for me." The chief's face darkened. "You will leave this village by nightfall. If you do not, I will have you executed." But Chinelo refused to let him go. The chief decreed that Chidi must go to the cursed quarry and return with a stone worthy of the royal crown, or die trying. The cursed quarry lay far beyond the village, past the dense forest and into the rugged hills that marked the edge of our land. No one had mined its stones in years, not since the last group of workers who ventured there returned empty-handed, their faces pale and their eyes haunted. They spoke of strange voices that echoed in the cavern, of shadows that moved when they shouldn't, and of whispers that seemed to rise from the stone itself. "It is a place of spirits," the elders had decreed. "No good can come from it." That was why the chief chose the quarry. It wasn't just a test of strength or skill, it was a sentence. If the spirits didn't claim Chidi, the journey would. The night Chidi left the village, the air was heavy with silence. Chinelo tried to stop him, clutching his hands as they stood beneath the baobab tree near the village edge. "You don't have to go," she said, her voice breaking. "We can live together. Run far away, to a place where my father's rich can't find us." Chidi shook his head. "And live in shame." "No, Chinelo. I will return, and when I do, your father will have no choice but to accept us." Chinelo pressed something into his palm, a small leather pouch. "For strength," she whispered. Inside was a small carving she had made, a tiny figure of a warrior holding a shield. Chidi kissed her forehead, then turned and began walking. He didn't look back. The journey to the quarry was treacherous. The forest was thick, the undergrowth tangled with thorns that tore at his clothes. The calls of night creatures surrounded him, their glowing eyes watching from the darkness. On the second night, as he rested near a small fire, he heard the crack of a branch. His hand flew to the knife at his side. "Who's there?" he called. There was no response, but the rustling grew louder. Then, from the shadows, a wild dog emerged, its eyes glowing with hunger. Chidi stood slowly, gripping the knife. The dog growled, circling him, its movements cautious but ready. When it lunged, Chidi was faster. He sidestepped, slashing out with his blade. The dog yelped and retreated, but it didn't flee. It kept its distance, pacing at the edge of the firelight until dawn. Chidi didn't sleep that night. By the time he reached the quarry on the 4th day, Chidi's feet were blistered, his throat parched. The entrance loomed before him, a jagged opening in the hillside, framed by vines and blackened stones. The stories came back to him then, the tales Uko used to tell when they sat by the forge late at night. They say the quarry was once a sacred place, Uko had said, his voice low. The gods themselves dug its stones, using them to build the first villages. But when man grew greedy, taking more than he needed, the gods cursed it. They left behind spirits to guard the stones, and those who enter with greed in their hearts never return. Chidi wasn't greedy, but he wasn't innocent either. He was here for Chinelo, for love, but he couldn't help wondering if the spirits would see his quest as selfish. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the darkness. The quarry was a labyrinth of narrow tunnels and vast chambers, its walls glistening with veins of obsidian. The air was cold and damp, carrying a faint metallic smell. As Chidi moved deeper, his footsteps echoed, a constant reminder of how alone he was. He carried a torch made from a branch he had soaked in animal fat, its flickering light casting long, jagged shadows. Then he heard it, a whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer. It was a voice, faint but distinct, calling his name. Chidi. He froze, gripping his knife. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are not welcome here," it said. "I mean no harm," Chidi replied, his voice trembling. "I seek only a stone." The whisper turned into laughter, soft at first, then growing louder, until it echoed through the cavern like thunder. "Prove yourself," the voice said. "Or leave." The ground beneath Chidi's feet began to shake. From the shadows, figures emerged, shapes carved from darkness, their eyes glowing like embers. They surrounded him, their movements fluid and unnatural. One stepped forward, taller than the others. It held out its hand, palm up, revealing a small, glowing orb of light. "Choose," it said, its voice resonating like a drumbeat. The orb split into two, one glowing red, the other blue. "The red will lead you to a stone, but it will cost you something dear," the spirit said. "The blue will lead you to safety, but you will leave empty-handed." Chidi hesitated, sweat dripping down his face. The chief's voice echoed in his mind, "If you do not return with a stone, you will be a dead man." He reached for the red orb. The moment his fingers touched the orb, it dissolved into light, and the spirits vanished. The cavern shifted, the walls rippling like water. Before him was a massive slab of obsidian, its surface smooth and glinting like the night sky. Chidi approached it, but as he reached out, pain shot through his chest. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The spirit's laughter returned, louder and more menacing. "You have chosen," they said. "Now pay the price." The pain subsided, but Chidi felt weaker, as though a part of him had been taken. Still, he forced himself to his feet. He had come too far to give up now. Using his tools, he chipped away at the slab, breaking off a piece the size of his torso. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked, but he hoisted it onto his back and began the long journey home. By the time Chidi emerged from the forest, the village was gathered at the edge, waiting. His body was covered in dirt and sweat, his clothes torn, but he carried the stone with a determination that silenced the crowd. "I went to the quarry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I brought this for your crown." The chief stared at him, then at the stone. Finally, Izokoro turned to the elders and said, "The gods have spoken. He is worthy." A week later, Chidi and Chinelo were married. The stone was carved into a crown for the chief, who wore it during the ceremony as a symbol of Chidi's courage. But Chidi was never the same. The price he paid at the quarry remained a mystery, but sometimes, when the firelight caught his face just right, I thought I saw shadows in his eyes, remnants of the spirits that had tested him. Still, he had won. Not just the stone, but the love of the princess, and the respect of the village. And that is how Chidi became a legend.